Ladies and gentlemen, Nebraska football's off a bye week. We're fresh, we're healthy, we're ready to go. We're a double-digit favorite over Sparty. Is this a must-win game for Nebraska? If I say it's not, am I just drinking the Kool-Aid? If I say it is, am I being a hater? Got to be 1,000% positive at all times, right? No, I said 8-4, 9-3. Ladies and gentlemen, we're on track. Let's chat, shall we? Welcome to the Carriker Chronicles, the People Show. Checking the pulse of Husker Nation, brought to you by DPS Concrete Construction. Check them out at dpsconstruction.net. Also, if you're so inclined, you can follow me on the social medias. I'm on X, TikTok, and the Book of Face, Facebook. All right, ladies and gentlemen, if you're like me and you believe Nebraska really needs to beat Michigan State, smash the like button. But is it a must-win? All right, stay tuned. Don't go anywhere. And as always, if you haven't subscribed or rang that notification bell just yet, go ahead and do so. Join what I'm dubbing the Carriker's crew. If you're a part of what we're doing here, you're a part of Carriker's crew. If you haven't joined yet, by subscribing and ringing that bell of notification, go ahead and do so. Join Carriker's crew. And frankly, if you are a part of Carriker's crew and you've been here for a while, hit the like button if you haven't already done so. And the second half of this show, it's a special two-part show. We got a former Nebraska football player, a Husker, all right, and one of the best to do it on the gridiron, is now an expert in his field of being a doctor, a surgeon, Mr. Scott Strasburger. Stay tuned for that expert analysis in the second half of this show. Is Michigan a must-win for Nebraska? It's funny, I got a show on 93.7 The Ticket in Lincoln. My producer, Jake, said, well, it's a must-not-lose. I was like, must-not-lose. Michigan State is a must-not-lose game, ladies and gentlemen. Let's look at this from multiple angles. Because right off the top, it's like, no, this is a must-win. This is a must-not-lose game. All right, step back for a second. Mathematically, does it eliminate us from anything? Just bear with me. Don't go flipping out at the screen just yet. Just wait a minute, then you can flip out if you'd like. Mathematically, we'd be 3-2. Does it eliminate us from anything? No. Because then you can go win the next 3 games in October and still be 6-2. Not what I'm advocating for, nor I don't want to get too far ahead of myself because I'll put out my preview and prediction show tomorrow night. So stay tuned for that. So pause on what I was about to say. I'll finish that thought tomorrow on my preview and prediction show for Nebraska versus Michigan State. Mathematically, everything would still be in front of us. But there's more that goes into this than just math and numbers. We know that. There's a psychological component of this. All right, bear with me. 2012, mathematically, I was on a Redskins team that was 3-6. We went into a bye week. We won 7 straight games, won the division, had home field in the playoffs. Unfortunately, lost in the first round. Yes, I was hurt during a lot of that season. But being on that team, around the people in that building, the 7-game win streak after starting 3-6 when people wrote us off was crazy. You never know what can happen. You never know when a team can get hot. We still need to beat Michigan State, in my humble opinion. You look at the 93 Cowboys, the 2001 Patriots, who, by the way, that was the epic upset of the Rams in the Super Bowl. I believe that was Tom Brady's first Super Bowl championship. The New York Giants, who beat the 18-0, trying to be 19-0 Patriots, maybe the greatest football team of all time that didn't win a Super Bowl. A team they'd already lost to in the regular season, at home, by the way. All those teams started off 0-2 that I just mentioned and won Super Bowls. The 93 Cowboys, the 2001 Patriots, the 2007 New York Giants. All started off 0-2 and won Super Bowls. Does that really apply to Nebraska? Not really. We're not winning a Super Bowl. Frankly, I looked up the numbers and I wanted to share it with you and sound smart. My point is, mathematically, it would still be there. But it goes way beyond that. We know that. There's a psychological component of this. Poor Penn State. Can't win the big game. Really good football program. James Franklin's a really good football coach. But perception, okay, the psychological aspect of things start to come in to play. All right, there's a perception which isn't reality. But here's the thing. Perception becomes reality, especially the longer something sustains over time. So psychologically, it can have an impact. If you've done something in the past, if you haven't, if you've struggled with it, if you're good at it, you're going to have a psychological perception of something. And that perception, whether it's reality or not, will become reality in people's minds. All right, perception becomes what you believe, ergo perception becomes reality. So mathematically, would we be eliminated? No. If we lose to Michigan State, we're still going to be favored versus, I mean, right now, we're favored over Maryland, Minnesota, Northwestern, UCLA, the rest of the schedule. I think even Iowa at home, we're favored. Last time I looked, it's been a while. You know, it's really USC, Penn State that we're not favored in. So that's mathematically. But in reality, when it comes to perception, when it comes to psychologically, I think this is a must-not-lose or a must-win game for Nebraska. Think about this. We'd be 4-1. How different would you feel on Saturday evening if Nebraska was 4-1? Then you're going to Maryland, who's a pretty good team, by the way, going to be favored. Minnesota, who's beaten us 5 straight times, and what is it, 6 out of 7, 5 out of 6? I don't really care at this point. Right now, we'd be favored in their house, and then Northwestern a gigantic favorite. My point is simply this. If we're 4-1 after beating Michigan State and we are looking ahead to October before we ever get into November, let's say we lose one of these next 4 games. We're still 6-2. We're bowl eligible before November. Remember the field storming when we beat Wisconsin to become bowl eligible for the first time since 2016? I didn't say the year because I'm tired of talking about it, but we'd be bowl eligible before November. Then we just have to go 500 in November just to get to 8 wins, and that's the bowl game could potentially be the 9th win. We could be 7-1. That ball bounce is funny. Who knows what's going to happen if we're 7-1 at the end of October? And no, don't tell me I'm drinking Kool-Aid. I'm looking at this thing, and I think it's realistic. Now, again, mathematically, is this a must-win? No. It is a must-not-lose, though, because of the psychological effects of this. The perception would become even stronger about certain things that ain't so positive, or should I say frustrating, that have frustrated fans in recent memory. Okay, that perception would become, and that frustration would become even stronger. And yes, whether it's right or not, whether it's the way it should be or not, perception over time does become reality. So again, mathematically, no. Psychologically, yes. Ergo in reality, is this kind of a must not lose, aka a must win game for Nebraska? Yes. We're gonna be off a bye week, at home, and Pick 6 Previews, I just did an interview with him. For over a decade, Brett Ciancia, Pick 6 Previews, has had the most accurate way of predicting the outcome of college football games for over a decade, every single year straight during that time. He's the most accurate predictor of the outcome of college football games. When he told me, hey, I've got you guys a 2-touchdown favorite over Michigan State, I about fell over. I was like, what? Go watch the interview. Go check it out. You'll enjoy the interview as a whole. His bowl game destination, the opponents he thinks will play, okay? And he's very realistic about things as well. People get frustrated and then they get over the top optimistic, then they get a little bit over the top frustrated. I get it. Maintain it in the middle. Maintain it in the middle. If we beat Michigan State, we're 4-1. If we're not, we're 3-2, and man, October is still there, but it would be tough. Now, if you didn't know, Nebraska does open officially as an 11.5-point favorite over Sparty. Again, we're coming off a bye week. We're healthy. We're fresh. They're coming off a bye week too, just FYI. And we're at home, and we are right now an 11.5-point official favorite. Okay? And just a reminder, my preview prediction show for Nebraska versus Michigan State comes out tomorrow. Now, and I'm going to dive way more into this tomorrow. What I feel good about, our passing game, they don't have such a great pass defense. Our pass defense, graded out as the number 1 in the country, not just statistically, but graded out that way, according to Brett Ciancia and Pick 6 Previews. And his metrics have no bias, okay? They just are what they are. What has me concerned, stopping the run, running the ball, can we win the battle in the trenches? I will talk more about that tomorrow. I got some interesting things for you fine folks at home. So in summation, before I get to these, mathematically, we, again, for the 1 billionth time, we would not be eliminated. And you never know what could happen. I've seen it before. I've experienced it. I've been on teams. I've watched other teams just get red hot when it makes no sense. I don't want to count on that, though. If we're 4-1 and you look at the next 3 games, Maryland ain't going to be easy. Minnesota ain't going to be easy. Northwestern should be easy, with all due respect. We're going to be favored in all of them, and it's very realistic to expect, at worst, we're 6-2 at the end of October. And then you just go 500 in November, you're 8-4, you can get a 9th win in the bowl game. And honestly, if we would just win the games we're favored and pull off 0 upsets, why can't we pull off an upset, by the way? Why can't that happen? It's all there on the table. 8+ wins or more, very realistically. Starting with getting back on track against Michigan State. And now I want to give a shout out to our sponsors, DPS Concrete Construction, our longtime partners, because they do phenomenal work. Nobody is better when it comes to concrete work and retaining wall expertise. Check them out at dpsconstruction.net. If you need concrete work, retaining wall work done, and the like, go to dpsconstruction.net. Also, if this is the type of work you do and you're looking for a good employer and a good job, Jason Armstrong is the guy you want to work for. Again, check them out at dpsconstruction.net. I also want to give a shout out to our sponsors and good partners, Husker Auto Group. Check them out at huskerautogroup.com. They have new GMC Sierras at 20% off of MSRP. 2025 Chevy Silverados, 20% off as well. New 2025 Escalades in stock with $5,000 off of MSRP. Call Husker Auto Group for details. That number is 402-479-7500 or visit huskerautogroup.com. All trades accepted. Financing available with APR financing as low as 0%. 2025 models going fast. All new 2026 models are arriving daily. All right, I got some things I want to fly through here. Dylan Raiola is the number 2 passer in the entire Big Ten Conference when it comes to completion percentage. Look at the guy at the bottom. If you can run for almost 300 yards, though, it doesn't matter. I apologize for that comment. I just love this fan. Phenomenal outfit. Can I borrow it for Halloween? Oh, speaking of fans, I want to be like this guy. I want to be like this guy who isn't afraid to stand out in a crowd. If you're listening on podcast, I apologize. It's an Oregon fan standing in the middle of about 150 Penn State fans all by himself. That's awesome. And just remember, Cincinnati, they ripped off their 3rd straight win since losing to Nebraska. Quarterback Brendan Sorsby, who the Huskers held to 69 yards, had 440 yards of all-purpose yards and 2 touchdowns versus Kansas State. Cincinnati is a low-key dark horse team, dark horse contender in the Big 12. They are much better than people realize, and I've been saying that since I saw them in the pregame on the sideline before we played them. I'm not saying they're a national title contender, but they're a dark horse contender in the Big 12. Matt Rhule did say, and I quote, on the Pat McAfee show last week, "It was probably the best practice that we've had all year. I think our defense made a real jump this week," end quote. And then he went on to say, and I quote, "I hate that we have a bye week after losing that game because you want to get back out there and play. We went out there on Tuesday and played football for about an hour and 15 minutes. Sometimes you just got to get back to playing the game," end quote. See what happens in the game. Nebraska's been recruiting hard. 2027 wide receiver Jabari Watkins has committed to the Huskers, 6'2", 180 pounds. All right, there's his official commitment picture. Pretty sweet, pretty cool. Nebraska's still been recruiting hard. All right, 2027 4-star tight end Jax DeJean has set up 5 game day visits for this fall. Nebraska is among them, along with Alabama, Michigan, Iowa, and Kansas State. All right, Hollyman, I hope I'm saying that right, my man, has narrowed it down to 5 schools: Auburn, Iowa, Wisconsin, Nebraska, Illinois. And if you look at the early 2027 team recruiting rankings, Nebraska's number 3 in the country, behind Penn State, Oklahoma, and in front of Miami, Ohio State, Notre Dame, Florida State, Ole Miss, Clemson, and Michigan. I just thought this picture was cool. And as October approaches, here's an aerial view of Memorial Stadium on Halloween 1959. Look how different it is now. By the way, the Huskers upset Oklahoma on that day, 25-21. The top 25 high schools in the country for producing collegiate football talent. Look at number 25 in the country, Millard South, Nebraska. Nebraska produces some good football players. This is one of the craziest photos in college football history. One of the craziest field stormings when Virginia upset Florida State. All right, there's as they're getting ready to rush the field. There's after they've rushed the field. And there's when the field is fully flooded. Just remember, even in your fandom, ladies and gentlemen, take this for what it's worth, unsolicited advice. Intensity does nothing. That's not entirely true, but consistency does everything. All right, Lincoln Riley was not happy about playing at 9 a.m. versus Illinois at 9 a.m. Pacific time. It was 11 a.m. Central time. They had the latest kick the week before of any college football team in the country, and then the earliest the following week versus Illinois, if you go by the 9 a.m. Pacific time thing. Some things in college football just don't make sense. Oh, here's the Big 12 graphic. I meant to put this up earlier. Iowa State, Texas Tech, Arizona State are the favorites. There's BYU and Cincinnati. Again, they're not a national title contender, but if they win the Big 12, they are in the CFP. They're a dark horse contender there. Some things just don't make sense in college football. The ACC schedule is an abomination, Josh says. Miami plays 1 game in the next 20 days. In other words, they had a bye week. They're going to play Florida State this Saturday, then they have another bye week. What is going on? Other things that don't make sense. Yes, Indiana's good at football. Check the man's t-shirt for the 2nd straight year. Indiana starts 5-0 for the first time in school history. And Indiana is in the top 5 with a 68.4% chance to make the college football playoff, a 16.2% chance to win the Big Ten, and a 16.1% chance to make the national title game. They also have the 7th best strength of schedule in the country. Kurt Signetti, I don't have to like you to respect you, do I? And you look at the Big Ten as a whole, in the college football AP poll, we have 4 teams in the top 10, 6 teams that are ranked as a whole. And you look at the top 4 teams with the best percentage chances to make the college football playoff. 3 of them are in the Big Ten. And there's Indiana at number 4, 68.4% chance. Oregon, Ohio State, 87.3 and 87.2% chance. All of a sudden, Alabama's good again, 69.2% chance of making the playoff. Congrats to Dan Lanning. Got his first road win versus a top 5 team as Oregon's head coach. Ladies and gentlemen, just because you haven't done it before doesn't mean you can't do it. And just because you haven't done it in a while doesn't mean you can't do it again. It just means you got to get that first one under your belt before before number 2, 3, and 4 become a little bit easier. This sign was hilarious on game day. How tough can Oregon be if they don't even wrestle? We didn't see that sign again the rest of the day at Penn State, by the way. You know, James Franklin is a good football coach. I don't put this up here to shame him. I respect him. But it just shows 4-20 versus AP top 10 teams, 1-17 in conference play versus top 10 teams. It shows how hard it is sometimes to get those things that have been eluding you. But it can be done. I apologize for the untimeliness of this next picture. This was just a great screen grab. I don't even remember the coach of the team. There's a picture with it. But he said, "We had a good team on paper. Unfortunately, the game was played on grass." Sorry that went right after James. That was a coincidence. I apologize about that. Because rivalries are fun, and Colorado's not a rival. They're just a little brother. Deion Sanders is struggling in Colorado without Shadur and Travis Hunter. They are off to a 2-3 start. You know what? I did want to put this up here. And I know I'm having fun with certain things and pointing out certain things, but in all seriousness, okay, you look at this graphic. We lost to a ranked Michigan team by 3 points, allowing 391 yards, and then that's a picture of John Butler. Then you got Tony White, lost to unranked Virginia by 8 points in double overtime, allowing 440 yards. My point is this. I actually did not want to put this up here to bring it to light. I'm going to put it up here. I say we let those guys down at Florida State do their thing. Just let them do their thing. Let's not worry about comparing and contrasting, okay? This last thing is just a crazy stat. Now, this was before this last weekend's slate of NFL games. I'm not a Raiders fan, so I haven't double-checked this. But going into this last weekend's slate of Sunday games, Ashton Jeanty had 144 total yards of rushing and 145 rush yards after contact. How bad is his offensive line? Thoughts and prayers to Ashton Jeanty. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's hit that interview with Dr. Strasburger. And we're back, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the change of scenery. But now we got a special guest, an expert in his field. All right, before that, he was a Husker All-Big 8 performer, Nebraska Football Hall of Famer, originally a walk-on, something that is staying around in college football, at least for the moment, which I'm happy about. Also, pertaining to what he does now, this is kind of a big deal, a two-time All-American, Mr. Dr. Scott Strasburger of Sagewell Orthopedics. And you guys just opened a new facility in Lincoln. That's exciting. How are you doing, my friend?
Doing great, Adam. And thanks for coming up for the grand opening last Thursday. That was awful generous of you.
Yeah, that was my pleasure. Thank you guys for having me. All right, so you guys, we actually chatted about these first two questions when you and I were in the hallway. I was like, well, let's start off the show and the interview with this. Emmett Johnson. All right, he's getting a major workload. Matt Rhule's even said he's kind of challenged his coaches to find a number 2 back. Do you get concerned at all if he's taken all these reps, all these carries? He's obviously a tough guy, but as the season wears along, is that something that should be concerning at all?
Well, we discussed this. Obviously, the more you play, the more you're exposed to injury. You're more exposed to injury if you're carrying the ball 30 times. But we also discussed last week when we talked about this, Adam, back in my day, for sure, even in your day, having a running back carry the ball 25, 35 times was not unusual. It's actually the norm. And I do believe there are some running backs, and I think he's one of them, that actually gets better the more he carries the ball, gets stronger. Obviously, the more times you carry the ball, the more times you're exposed to injury. But he's such a tight, well-trained athlete that I think he can safely carry the ball 25, 30 times. And like we've seen, he gets better as the game progresses.
All right, so the offensive line. Hopefully we play better this week versus Michigan State, but we are a big offensive line. The defensive line isn't quite as big there, but when it comes to the O-line, you've got guys like Teddy Prohaska. Man, I chatted with him before the season. I said, dude, I'm rooting for you. I've had about 10,000 surgeries of my own. He's come back from 3 major knee surgeries, starting at right tackle. Turner Corcoran's been on the field this year, coming back from a couple of major knee surgeries and injuries. When you're a big guy and multiple big-time injuries like that, how much harder is it to come back and play well? Because I admire him earning the starting job this year.
Yeah. Great question, Adam. We're talking now where offensive and defensive linemen routinely are over 300 pounds. Some of these guys are 6'5", 325 with body fat less than 15%. And these guys are in tremendous shape. So when you get all that strength and increased speed that we see nowadays, you have a lot more energy involved at the line of scrimmage. Point of contact, you're getting some really big, strong, muscular, heavy guys, and things happen, especially in the line where guys go to the ground and people get hit in the knee. So it is a little bit more dangerous position, and you obviously need to have your depth at every position, but offensive and defensive line, it's really imperative to have multiple guys that you can play because injuries are bound to happen. Just, unfortunately, these guys have all sustained real significant knee injuries.
I also want to give a shout out to 626 Auto Service in Lincoln. Nobody does it better, ladies and gentlemen. Check them out at 626autoservice.com. They are located at 2405 P Street in Lincoln, locally owned for 2 decades, 20 years, ladies and gentlemen. If and when you go in, ask for Dean Phelps. He's the owner. He's a good dude. Or Eric or Jeff, and tell them that Adam sent her. They do great work at a reasonable price. As you know, we now have kids who are driving, and it's where my family, my wife and I and my kids take all of our vehicles to be taken care of. Everything from oil changes to engine replacements. They offer shuttle rides, loaner vehicles, financial aid as well if needed. Again, that's 626 Auto Service in Lincoln. Check them out at 626autoservice.com. How rare is it that somebody can come back like that from 3 major knee surgeries, speaking of Teddy specifically, and earn a starting job at Nebraska and in the Big Ten Conference? And obviously, we need to play better as a whole up front. But how rare and kind of how unique is that?
Well, not as rare as it used to be. Surgically, we've become pretty adept at reconstructing knees and getting them back to where they were pre-injury wise. A lot of dedication on their part. As we know, Teddy's been through a lot. He's recovered. His mindset is wonderful. Sometimes kids can get apprehensive about getting back out on the field after an injury. The hardest thing probably getting back out on the field is up, what's between the ears and not what's down in the knee. You got to get your confidence back. And Teddy and a bunch of those guys have really come back, worked hard, and are doing a great job. But it is a violent sport, and injuries happen.
So you mentioned guys are bigger and faster, and the impacts are a little bit bigger as time goes along. It just seems to be more and more that way. How much of an impact does that, I don't want to say pressure, but like when you're the strength and conditioning coach, you want guys to get bigger, faster, stronger, but you also want to keep them healthy. So how much of an impact, how much of role in this does the strength and conditioning play as you're trying to get guys to play at their peak performance, yet also prevent injuries as well?
Yeah, conditioning and strength is paramount importance. You'll see a lot of injuries occur at the end of half, the end of games when kids are fatigued, maybe not putting forth the protection, the strength, the technique that they need. They get tired. That fails a little bit and kind of exposes them to injuries a little bit more often. But the stronger they are, the better shape they're in, the more likely they are to protect themselves. But even under those circumstances, injuries can happen.
Yeah, it's interesting because guys get fatigued. Obviously, you're going to be a little bit more liable to get hurt. I've also noticed when guys are out there trying not to get hurt, they tend to go slower. The other like if you're going this fast trying not to get hurt and the other guy's just going, you're going to lose that impact. So it's the guys who are playing 100% at all times that tend not to get hurt. Another question I wanted, other question I wanted to ask you. We've gone from playing 11 regular seasons in a bowl game, 12 games. Then you added conference championship games. Then you had a 14 playoff. Now it's a 12-team playoff. Now you got a 12-game regular season, conference championship game, and potentially 4 playoff games.
Yeah.
And now they're talking about like a 90,000 team playoff, but we're not there yet. That's up to potentially 17 games that you could play in order to win a national title. I mean, that's exponentially more reps, more stress on the joints. How much of an impact does that play into being a college football player and staying healthy?
Well, as you know, you see end of the year fatigue in everyone. People physically and mentally start to break down. Practices get a little bit shorter and more protective in those circumstances to try to diminish the exposure to injury. But just like we've talked about, the more games you play, the more exposure you get, the more likely an injury is going to occur. So it's really important for these guys to maintain their strength and conditioning during the season, especially when you're around the holidays, when the playoffs are going to be. You have all this other commitments, this and this, you have travel. So it's really imperative to keep these guys focused on staying in shape. The better shape they're in, the less likely they're going to get sustain an injury.
That's a great point. And for those wondering, like you said, maintaining, like when you're in the season, it's a maintenance program. You're not really trying to put on strength and weight because you're getting beat up in practice and games, but you're not trying to lose. You're trying to maintain. So that's a great point. All right, here's a question. I've been waiting 10 years to ask a doctor, and you're the guy. You're the expert here. So I had 6 knee surgeries when I was trying to come back and play in the NFL about 10 years ago. Tore my quad tendon. Tore it again a month later doing the whatever that machine was. It was supposed to flex. It tore it again in the stupid machine. I don't like the machine, so I don't remember the name, and I think it's stupid. Then I had 4 more surgeries on that same knee. A bone grew. They had to remove scar tissue because I couldn't get past 90 degrees, then couldn't get past 105. I had to get to 120. I finally did. So 6 knee surgeries on my right knee, 2 surgeries on my left ankle, not as major, and 1 on each shoulder. When I was trying to come back and play at the time, was I just out of my mind? Was that even realistic? Because in my mind, I could have done it. Obviously, I failed. But what's your take from your area of expertise? I finally get asked someone who can give me an honest answer.
Well, unfortunately, you sustained some of the recognized complications that occur after a major knee reconstruction. The hardest part is not those first couple weeks. It's the last 2 or 3 months where you think you're better. You're excited about getting back out on the field, but you still haven't got your body back to where it needs to be to protect itself. Multiple surgeries after a major knee injury that you sustained is not that uncommon. It's the prolonged recovery when you have to go back and reoperate for this, and this. You're looking at some of these injuries now that can take upwards of a year to fully recover. It's not unusual for us to keep routine anterior cruciate ligament tears out 8 or 9 months now, allowing kids to completely recover. There's some people we can push the threshold and get them back a little bit earlier than that, but we're being much more patient and expecting a more complete physical recovery now before we let people back out on the field. In your situation where you're trying to get back out on an NFL team, that's challenging. You don't necessarily have the time that you need. Everything's on their time frame. So it's a little bit of more difficult problem with a situation like yours, but it's still possible to make recoveries. It's still possible after 3 or 4 knee reconstructions to get yourself into condition where you can safely play and protect yourself. And that's the whole key. We want to get people recovered from their injuries so they can go on and do the non-football related things later in life. And, just like you're experiencing now you have, a whole football team of kids in your house, and I've seen them. They are incredibly active, but just trying to keep up with them becomes a challenge. So lots of variables involved, Adam, but you seem to be getting around just fine the other night when I saw you.
Yeah, standing up and sitting down, that was a real issue for a long time. I was on crutches for almost 6 months, and I didn't even try to jog. They wouldn't let me try to jog for a year. I actually got hooked on Vicodin, and I didn't realize it until I tried to come off, and I had withdrawal symptoms. But now I'm the king of backyard football, man. Backyard two-hand touch football is my jam. All right, one last question before I let you get out of here. You said coming back from major injuries and surgeries is a little bit more frequent than it's ever been. What are some of the advances that have been made that allow people to do that better nowadays?
Well, we've become very good during the recovery phase of getting people involved with their physical therapy program that allows them to probably maintain a little bit higher activity level. We have certain equipment that helps us protect the repair or reconstruction of the knee or shoulder, whichever body part it is. Therapy modalities that we never had before, equipment we've never had before, and we're really becoming very good at adapting to a much more progressive therapy program. So when people come back, and maybe it's taking a little bit longer, but they're more fully recovered than they used to be in the past. People don't understand when you have an injury, you lose a certain amount of strength immediately. And then, so what we try to do is build that strength back up and get you better prepared for surgery and the recovery that's going to occur following your surgery. So pre-surgical therapy and activities are important, doing the correct rehab and activities following surgery, and then transitioning back into being on the field. We don't just let someone go from the training room back to full contact practice. There's a transition that has to take place. And so we really become good at addressing all the areas, not just one particular.
All right, doctor, let the fine folks know what they need to know about Sagewell Orthopedics, your new facility you've opened up, the website, anything you want them to know.
Just in a new office, it was a unique opportunity. We were able to put an urgent care center here to help better serve our patients. So we've been just real pleased with everything.
Yeah, that facility just opened up here in Lincoln. All right, ladies and gentlemen, here are my questions, as always, brought to you by Husker Auto Group. Check them out at huskerautogroup.com. Also, CarrikerChronicles.com, the website as well. It's where all your Husker sports hopes and dreams will come true. It's just science. Number one, what's the thing you're the most confident about as Nebraska heads into this Michigan State game? Number two, what's the thing that you're the most concerned about? And number three, have you ever had an injury that you've been able to come back to and be fully functional in your everyday life? All right, you want to throw the bones with me, Doc? All right, until next time, go Big Red Nose. Remember, throw the bones.